In this video, we'll look at how to use Automapper to transform objects from one type to another. For example, converting domain models to data transfer models, etc. While Automapper is designed to work in API projects, we'll specifically demonstrate how to use it in an API project that implements the CQRS pattern. Automapper is a popular tool in .NET to manage conversions of one object to another. In a typical scenario, you can imagine having the same entity represented by different models in different layers of your application. A student entity, for example, may have a different layout in the database, the domain layer, and in its data transfer form. But not only does Automapper map a property in one model to a property in another model, it's also a type converter. Here, for example, Automapper can be used to convert a date type to an integer type when we convert a student's date of birth to an age property. Features of Automapper we'll be demonstrating are profiles. Automapper uses profiles to manage all the different conversions. Automatic mappings. These are simple one-to-one conversions. Projection. This is where one object is transformed into a different object. Custom mappings, converting one data type into another data type. And conditional mappings, performing a mapping based on a condition. Before we get started on Automapper, let's have a brief look at the project we're starting with. This is an API project that uses a clean architecture and implements the CQRS pattern. If you would like to learn more about clean architecture and the CQRS pattern, you can find links to tutorial videos in the description below. Our presentation layer, or API, has an application folder where we split our commands and queries, and a controller folder for the controllers. The domain layer has one core model for the student entity. This has an ID, student number, first name, last name, gender, and date of birth property. Then the infrastructure layer contains our repositories. Here we have one repository for the student. For simplicity, we use a static list to simulate data in a persistent database. It has a query method to get all students and a command method to add a student. Let's set up Automapper. Right-click the API project and select Manage NuGet Packages. Browse and install Automapper. Before we can register Automapper, we need a mapping profile. In the application folder, add a class called Mapping Profile. This class needs to inherit from Profile and will contain our conversion profiles. We'll look at these in a moment. To register Automapper, go to your program CS file and add the Automapper service. Here you'll pass it the name of the mapping profile class that we just created. Now let's look at the conversion we require. In our domain layer, we have a student model that represents the student entity that the repository reads and writes from and to the database. In the application layer, we have a data transfer object that is a student model we use for displaying to the user or maybe even generating reports based on gender and age. It has a student name, which we want to be the full last name and first name, a descriptive string property for the gender, and an age property that should be converted from the student's date of birth. We need to create an Automapper profile to project the domain model to the DTO model. In the mapping profile class we created earlier, we add a profile using createMap. We give it the source object, in this case student, and the destination object, the student DTO. Then for a member in the destination object, we can map a property from the source object. In the first instance, we just do a straight mapping from student number to student number. In the second mapping, we want our DTO to hold the full name of the student. So from the source object, we concatenate the last name and first name. For the gender, we want to convert an int value to a descriptive string value. Here we have a condition that says only map to the destination gender property if the gender value on the source object is greater than 0. If it is greater than 0, then do the mapping and assign a descriptive value based on the value of the gender property in the source object. Next, we need to map the date of birth to the age property in the student DTO. For this, we'll need a type converter. In our application folder, we created a new folder called Converters. And in there, we added a class called age converter. This class needs to inherit from iType converter, and we specify that it will convert a datetime type to an int type. Add a convert method that takes a source type, destination type, and resolution context. Inside the method, we do a simple algorithm to calculate an age from a date. Back in our mapping profile class, we add the type converter. Now, when we map the date of birth to the age property, it will use the type converter to convert the date time to an int value. With our mapper profile in place, let's see how we use it. Go to the query handler, or if you're not using the CQRS pattern, go to the method in your service that gets called by the controller. We inject the IMapper. Then in the method in this case, where we retrieve all the students, we convert each student to a student DTO object using our mapper. For the controller itself, there's no changes. When we run this and test the Get All Students endpoint in Swagger, we get a list of student DTOs. Note the student's name is now the full name. The gender is a descriptive value, and the age was calculated from the date of birth. As a quick last exercise, we'll demonstrate what automatic mapping is. In our domain layer, we created a model called course. This represents the course entity in our database. Take note of the property names. We have an ID, course code, and course name property. We added a repository for it to retrieve all courses. Again, like with the student, we created a static list to simulate data on a persistent database. In the application DTO folder, we added a course DTO model. Note the property names are the same as in the domain layer's model, except it doesn't have an ID property. In the mapping profile class, we add another profile. This time, it's a single line creating a mapping from a course object to a course DTO object. This is an automatic mapping. Automapper will match property names and types from the source object to the same properties in the destination object. In our query handler that gets all courses, or method in your service, if you're not using CQRS, we map every course object retrieved by the repository to a course DTO object. We added a Get All Courses endpoint to our controller. And when we test this in Swagger, we get a list of course DTOs without the ID property. Thank you for watching our video. For more tutorials on C#, hit subscribe and click the reminder. Give us a like so the video can be visible to more people.